Hello and welcome to Off With Their Headlines, hosted by me, Meredith Constant, and the beautiful Amanda Matta. How are you this morning,
Hey,
Amanda?
after your compliment at the top of every episode, I can do anything. Thank you so much, Meredith.
You can.
How are you doing?
You can. I am doing. We have a lot of exorcist type throwing up in my household. There's a lot going on. There are stomach bugs abound.
It's rough.
It's rough out there. Okay.
Yeah. Stay safe, y'all. We had that. Well, not me. I somehow escaped unscathed, but Mr. Fact, Shane had it like a week ago. It was
That
bad.
poor guy. Yeah.
Yeah.
So today I'm hopeful that this doesn't get interrupted, but we'll see.
We'll see. And it's okay if it does. You know, we grace. Room
Grace.
to be human.
A little housekeeping. You can obviously watch this a week later on YouTube or watch it when it comes out over on Patreon. We have fun over there. There's great free subscriber conversation that happens over there. Our mailbag, which we are going to be recording soon. We also have a no ad tier, a bonus episode tier. And this month, our bonus episode was not red, white, and royal view, but instead it was red, white, and royal blue.
It's like cemented in your brain now.
I can't get rid of it.
You can't help but say it.
Did you see I love how I'm asking you if you saw this. Did you see the reel that I made for our Instagram?
I did.
How good was that Photoshop?
It was really good. You should be proud of yourself.
I was so proud because one of my friends said, "Oh yeah, I gotta watch this OG one." And I said, "No, it's not real." And they were like, "What do you mean?" And I showed them, and they're like, "That's brilliant." Because I even changed the tagline: "Love whoever you want, as long as it's in the biblical sense." I really went hard on it. I spent way too much time, but I was giggling the entire time. So definitely check out our Instagram. It's interesting.
It is fun. Off With Their Headlines on Instagram. Also, I have a quick little event announcement. If you are in, the United States, but more specifically the East Coast, Pennsylvania, where I live, I am hosting an afternoon tea this spring on April 5th. It's going to be at Sweet Remembrances, which is my local tea room. It's going to be amazing. Their scones are legendary. It's so good. The tea service is incredible. You get bottomless pots of tea. And I will be there just yapping about the royal origins of tea time. So it's like a combination talk while you drink your tea and full afternoon tea service.
I am trying so hard to get out to this. Like, you have no idea. Because I'm like, I want to go to this tea.
Yeah, you should.
I want to experience this. So you might have a little weirdo gremlin in the corner.
Perfect.
That's me, just shoving scones in my purse.
Yeah, absolutely. Save them for later. They'll keep. Yeah, so I'll put the link for that to get tickets in the episode description. The tea house is run by two sisters, and they do everything themselves in-house. It's fabulous. So yeah, come out and hang out with me at afternoon tea this spring.
That sounds lovely. Now today, before we get into the interview that Amanda did, we are going to be discussing a little drop that happened very late at night.
I was
last night,
fully sleeping,
Monday evening, and very, very, very early in the morning for the UK press, and after broadsheets would have gone out. So missed that news cycle.
I could hear them. Thank you, sir. Thank you. We can eat. We can finally feed our families.
We can buy scones for your special jam that you made. I looked at that and I said, Meghan, I had to go to bed.
Yeah.
Why doesn't she think of my schedule? I'm just kidding.
She literally does live on her own time, which is Montecito time at this point.
Please.
I love that.
Do your thing. Do your thing. So we will be talking about that at the end of this episode. Meghan's new brand, rebrand, ?
Preemptive rebrand, yeah.
But before that, Amanda, tell the listeners what we have in store today.
Yes. So we have a very special episode. It is our first interview for Off With Their Headlines. We sat down and we talked to Sarah Raughley.
Now, this is our first interview. Unfortunately, because of delayed starts, because of weather, I was not able to be on the interview, which I am very, very sad about.
Yeah, it was a great conversation. I'm really bummed you weren't there for it because I asked our questions that we had kind of written down beforehand, but the conversation we ended up having was just as good. Sarah Raughley is a YA author, but she's making a pivot into something more adult, which we do talk about in our discussion, with a new book called The Queen's Spade, which follows the reimagined life of Sarah Forbes Bonetta, who was the Black goddaughter of Queen Victoria. It's a work of fiction. There are murder plots, revenge fantasies. It is so good, so juicy, and we read the book, we loved it. I picked her brain about all things race and the royal family, which she was so gracious to work through with me. She gave us some insight on her own work. She holds a PhD in English, and she does postdoctoral research on post-colonialism, representations of race and gender in pop media culture, youth culture, and just in general. I am so excited for you to hear this. And I'm so bummed you missed it, Meredith.
I am so bummed because I had so many questions and just to pick her brain. I can't think of a better person to write a book like this than Sarah. And I can't wait. I haven't even heard the conversation. So I'm going to hear it when it drops. So I'm very, very excited.
We do bring in the Meghan Markle of it all. And I asked, are there some parallels in Sarah and Meghan's stories? And spoiler alert, yes. But yeah, I hope you enjoy. I am joined by the author Sarah Raughley today to discuss her new book, The Queen's Spade, which is just fabulous. First of all, congratulations on a great book launch and a great leap from children's young adult fiction to a little more adult.
Thank you. It has been a leap.
Yeah. What was that like going from, you wrote children's books originally? Am I understanding that right?
Yeah. I mean, I've always written YA, young adult. And young adult technically is 13 and up. And I've usually written fantasy as well. So this is not only sort of a upper young adult / adult crossover, but it is also not fantasy. It doesn't have fantastical elements in it. And so it's been a big challenge, but also it's been so fun to explore that side of me and to experiment.
For sure. And so you drew inspiration from the story of Sarah Forbes Bonetta, who was a real person. So that's also a departure from the fantasy angle. What drew you to Sarah, or Ina, as we maybe should call her, as a character?
I was doing a lot of research into how Black people lived in 19th century Britain, because I think there's this weird perception that people of color didn't exist in Britain before the 70s, before they immigrated in the 70s, which just isn't true. People of color, racialized people have been in Europe for hundreds and hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years. So I was learning about Black people in Victorian London, and I came across Sarah Forbes Bonetta as, wow, Queen Victoria had an African goddaughter? She was an African princess. And I was like, this not only should be known already to people, but there should be a movie about it. There should be TV shows about it. I didn't understand why I had never learned about this human being. So I just fell down the rabbit hole and learned more about her.
And she is so interesting. So yeah, I've discussed her on my art history podcast, and now Meredith and I are doing this royal media podcast. So it's a little bit different of a lens to apply to Sarah, the royal history versus, I talked about how she was represented in art history through a project to represent Black individuals in British history. But in that episode, I talked about how we don't know a lot about Ina from her own point of view. She didn't leave a ton of, written things in the historical record from her own point of view. So there is a lot of gray area when it comes to her own perspective, her own experience. So what did you find as you were kind of researching her, or what was your research process like, I guess I should ask?
It's funny because I found the same thing. I came to the same conclusion that you did, because there's so much written about her at that time by newspapers, by Captain Forbes, who was the captain who took her from Africa to England and presented her to Queen Victoria. There are some letters from Sarah Forbes Bonetta that I was able to read, but there aren't a lot of primary sources from her mouth. And the thing about Ina, or Sarah, or whatever you want to call her, is she was very much more important to Britain in terms of what she represented for them and what she represented for the Queen. She represented the Queen's benevolence. She represented the benevolence of the British Empire, this idea that British colonialism and imperialism is a good thing. See, we're quote unquote civilizing the native, that kind of thing. So because of that, you have a lot of this kind of almost propagandic sources, primary sources discussing her, but not a lot from her voice. So I took everything that I could. I read a lot of books. I read some dissertations and I found what I can, but I realized that a lot of Ina's voice would have to be supplemented by me. So I supplemented Ina's voice with sort of how I felt about the situation.
Okay.
So it's not like she actually wanted to like kill the queen.
Right. Spoiler alert.
It's not like she actually wanted revenge against all these people, as far as we know.
Mm-hmm.
But I think there's so much embedded in her story about how she was treated as a Black woman that I wanted to bring and fictionalize some of those elements that are already in her story.
Yeah, that's just such a fascinating way to approach her story because, yes, we learn very early on in the book, probably, I think from page 1,
Yes.
that Sarah is not just existing as this kind of tokenized Black woman in the British Empire, but she is out for revenge and she's strategizing and she's kind of playing the royal court's game for her own purposes. So there is this revenge thriller plot, which really, it's so powerful how you make those emotions come off the page. You just feel the rage, the anger at the system here. And Sarah's struggle for autonomy is obviously the central part of this. She's living in a society that sees her both as this exotic specimen, but also lesser than, she's seen as subordinate to the white upper class members of British society. So is that something you said you were drawing on your own emotions? How did you connect your own research, because you study or you teach post-colonial theory? How were you able to connect kind of that aspect of your research to writing fiction? It's just so fascinating to me.
Well, I think I connected it to my life experience. And I think my scholarly research is also connected to my life experience. Like, why do I study this? It's because I've been through it. What is it like to be a Black woman living in a multiracial society that purports to be, multicultural and, we all tolerate each other, although tolerate is a very interesting word, but that tends to be the used, right? In Canada, where I am in Britain, I know America has the melting pot, that symbol of like everybody, like we're all in this together. But I think lived experience tells us that that's not necessarily true. When you're a person of color, there are things that you go through despite all of these discussions of multiculturalism. There are things that you go to that other people don't go through. And, I lived a pretty privileged-ish upbringing. I went to private schools. It's usually the only Black girl in those private schools, in those classes, surrounded by white students. And it was just a very strange experience where I never really felt affirmed in my Blackness. And I had people touching my hair and all kinds of things. So I know what it's like to be like an interesting specimen to people, for people to look at me and be like, oh, that's so, like, why does your hair do that? And how come your feet the soles of your feet are white like mine, but they're brown at the top? Why is that? And just various things that kind of makes you feel like an animal in a zoo. So I really I really identified with Ina's plight. And I really resented the idea that, she should be grateful that Queen Victoria, the Queen of England, brought her into her inner circle, because I think for the people who think that way, they're not really understanding just what it takes to belong or to try to belong in those circles.
Thank you for sharing your own perspective there, because it must be so frustrating to even be at this elite position in society. You mentioned going to private school. That's not an opportunity available to many people in society today. And Sarah's navigating elite circles. She's friends with the heirs to the British throne. She is going to royal weddings, and women of color navigating those spaces and still experiencing these issues 200 years down the line must be, I mean, it is frustrating. But you mentioned Queen Victoria and her relationship with Sarah, and it's often been framed in the history books as an example of this quote unquote benevolent Victorian attitude towards people of color. And Sarah's point of view in the book gives us a different interpretation of that relationship. So were there complexities about her relationship with the royals that stuck out to you? Because I know you mentioned some of them in the book. There's a quote, I can't remember exactly what it was, but she basically says to someone, how can the royals take credit for freeing us from a system that they set up? And so things like that really stuck out to me, the hypocrisies. What were you encountering that kind of challenged the benevolent narrative?
Well, first of all,
it's a loaded question.
The Victorian era is, you can think of it as being bookended by Britain's relationship with African peoples, right? I mean, Queen Victoria's reign started with the abolition of slavery, at least across the British Commonwealth and all of our colonies. So not America. America was, its own country by then. They didn't abolish slavery until the Civil War in the 1860s. But in the 1830s, in Britain and British colonies, slavery is abolished. But then at the end of Queen Victoria's reign, you have the Second Boer War. So you have people going to South Africa and literally committing these atrocities, right, against African people. You also have around this time what's called the Scramble for Africa and the Berlin Conference, a little before this, where Britain was among the European nations who met in Berlin to literally carve out spaces in Africa, like on a map, to say who would own what, right? So this idea of Europeans owning Africa, owning Africans, being able to do what they want with African bodies, being able to take African resources for their own benefit, that element did not end with the official end of slavery. That idea of the commodification of Black bodies continued on throughout Queen Victoria's reign. So when you look at Sarah Forbes Bonetta, she's living at a weird inflection point in history where, technically slavery is abolished in Britain, but the logic of her commodification is still very much in place, which is why you have Captain Forbes, who on one hand saves her from being enslaved by the King of Dahomey, but on the other hand brings her to Queen Victoria and gifts her to Queen Victoria, gives her to the Queen as a gift, as if he had, imagine somebody can just take your child or your friend and give them to another human being as a gift. Like, that kind of logic was still in place. It wasn't this benevolent, wonderful time. And it wasn't a benevolent moment for her to be gifted to Queen Victoria. In many ways, it just reinforced that Britain still very much were holding on to this idea that Black bodies and Africans and African things were allowed to be taken and exchanged.
It's really powerful that you're able to challenge that misconception through fiction and through literature. Yeah, because we have seen historical revisionism try and sanitize not just, white people's role in this, but the British royal family's role in perpetuating colonialism, because that's what this is. At the end of the day, it's a colonial attitude. It's something we're still seeing ripples of today in how the royal family kind of approaches their colonial past. I think of Prince William in the Caribbean saying that slavery was abhorrent and it never should have happened, but he stops short of apologizing because there's a larger conversation about who shoulders the blame for these atrocities, how we need to approach them now to avoid blaming people. And it's mind-boggling that these conversations are still so caught up in semantics like that. So I think learning about Sarah and her story can help people understand a little bit better.
Yeah. It's so interesting that you mentioned, Prince William. I think they stop short of going all the way because they need to validate their own existence, right? The continued existence of the British Crown. Why do we still have this institution? The institution that is still benefiting from, slavery is abhorrent, but they're still benefiting from it in many ways. The wealth that they've, the social capital the privilege and even some of the jewels. Like I saw the coronation of the king and the funeral of Queen Elizabeth II, and the jewels that were stolen from Africa were right front and center. And it's like, I don't think they want to really challenge the status quo to the point where they no longer have the power that they do. So everything that they say up until, let's shake things up, let's allow these countries to not be connected to the British crown in any way. All of that is going to be something that's left unsaid. And everything else is just going to be like slavery was bad. And let's just hope that we get our brownie points from that. But then, I mean, they'll say something like that, but then the way that they treat Meghan Markle and the idea of Africanness, any drop of Blackness in their midst, I think says a whole different story about how they feel about Black and brown bodies.
Yeah, that was exactly what I was going to bring up next. Meghan Markle entering into the royal family. And she gets a lot of blame, I think, for reigniting these conversations about colonialism. But, that history still happened regardless of whether Meghan Markle marries into the royal family or not. So do you see echoes of Sarah, Ina, Sally, whatever we want to call her experience in how Meghan was treated by the royals, by the monarchy as an institution?
Yeah, I always say, like, before Meghan Markle, there was Sarah Forbes Bonetta. Like, she was the first African princess. But I think there was a difference there in that I feel like in history, Sarah was this controlled element. She was in the royal family, but she wasn't fully integrated into the royal family. She was controlled. In the book, at one point, when the idea that Sarah could have some kind of relationship with one of the princes, one of Queen Victoria's own sons, biological sons, everybody starts to lose it because it's one thing to have like, oh, this is my ward, this is my pet, this is somebody that I allow into this space, but she's not really one of us. That's one thing. It's another thing for bloodlines to be mixed. It's another thing for, Africanness to be now part of the blood genetic history of the royal family. And I think there are a lot of people who felt as if Meghan Markle had stolen their white prince, you know what I mean? Had stolen their white prince. Like, I'm going to straight up say it. I think there are a lot of white women who were like, Harry's ours and,
right.
Kind of thing. And I definitely think that a lot of the hate that Meghan Markle gets comes from the fact that she has crossed these racial lines and racial barriers. And that scares a lot of people. And there's a long history of this, right? If you think about America, quote unquote miscegenation laws, right? Like white people and Black people were not allowed to get married. We're not allowed to officially have children, even though it was already happening through slavery and women being assaulted and having their slave masters' children. So mixed race children were already happening. But the law was not acknowledging them. Law wanted to acknowledge and preserve this idea of an exceptional whiteness that couldn't be corrupted by anything. And I think Meghan Markle represents even more than Sarah Forbes Bonetta did in her time, this so-called corruption of an exceptional whiteness. What's more white than the British family, right? Because even when you look at America, it's like, well, that where does that come from? It comes from the British royals, British colonialism. So
Yeah, definitely. And with Meghan, I think the struggle for a lot of white people who would take issue with that is that she's literally entitled. She is set above them because of the way that this system works. And that is, I think, really, really hard to reconcile with if you're somebody who benefits actively from this prejudice. So given that, how do you react to phrases like unconscious bias being thrown into the conversation about the monarchy? Because that's what Prince Harry said his family suffers from, unconscious bias. And it, back when his book was coming out, sparked a lot of conversations.
I feel like he wants to say, like, yo, my family's racist, but he can't.
He can't. Sure.
And maybe he can't. I don't know if it's because he doesn't want to set off even more of a firestorm, because regardless of how these conversations go, the blame always somehow finds its way on Meghan. Like, regardless of what is said, if he straight up says that, I think my family is racist, they were born, believing racist things, people will say, oh, Meghan has turned him against his family. I mean, they're already saying that. I think Harry himself grew up with bigoted beliefs, probably, just because I think in society, if you think about racism, sexism, homophobia, et cetera, we live in a society that is a hierarchy, and there are social hierarchies: whiteness, patriarchy, cisgendered heteronormativity, all of that stuff. And so we are taught that first and foremost. For those who belong seamlessly into those identity positions, you probably won't have to go through a lot of bigotry in your life. And because you haven't gone through that bigotry, you may not understand that other people do, and you may not understand what it feels like to be on the receiving end of that bigotry. For those of us who don't fit into those categories for a number of reasons, whether we're women, Black women, BIPOC, trans, we have absolutely come up against barriers and challenges, so we know what it's like. But I also do think that people with privilege sometimes take that power, and they know that they have that power, and they use it to their advantage. So people can be unconsciously biased, but they can also be very consciously biased. They can also be very consciously racist and like revel in their racism. And whether or not, I don't know the royal family, so I can't speak to this, but from what Harry has said, I remember his interview with Oprah where he said one of his family members was worried about Meghan being pregnant and what if the baby comes out Black. I would bet you money, and not be afraid to lose that money, that some of his family members have been very consciously racist.
Sure. Yeah.
Like, I would bet money on that.
I think
And
that's a safe bet.
yeah, and I think maybe Harry just doesn't want to take it quite that far.
Okay. Sure. Makes sense. And in your opinion, there's not an easy answer here, but the monarchy as it exists today, with all of these efforts to re-examine its history and Britain's colonial history, is there a responsibility there to acknowledge its role in slavery, in colonizing more directly than they are currently?
I think so. I mean, some people might not be happy with what I'm about to say.
Okay.
So long as they are still benefiting from that history and unwilling to cede power, none of it matters. I don't think it will matter unless the monarchy doesn't exist anymore. And unless a lot of that money, a lot of those resources go back to the people who really were destroyed and oppressed because of slavery, because of colonialism, because of, the family members of the British royal family in Belgium, or in Germany, right? I mean, what happened in the Congo with King Leopold? He caused the deaths of almost as many people as Hitler caused in the Holocaust. How do you make up for that kind of loss, for that kind of life that's just gone, and that kind of tragedy that continues to affect Africans today, if you still want to be, benefiting from that pain and that history? I think the only way really is for there not to be a monarchy anymore. And I say this also because, when slavery ended, there were such things as reparations, but those reparations were given to slave masters who were seen to have lost their property when Black people were freed. It was like, oh no, all these white slave masters have lost their property. We're going to compensate them. There needs to be real, deep systemic changes. And I don't think that the monarchy is willing to do it.
that makes sense because it would involve kind of dismantling their own power structure.
Right.
So, bringing it back to Sarah, our heroine, if she were around today, how do you think she would feel about where the monarchy's at, the way that we're still handling these issues of colonialism, of race, and of Britain's history?
Wish I knew, because again, there's so few primary sources from Sarah's mouth.
Hmm.
So did she really, were there moments where she was bitter about her circumstances? Maybe there were, but I don't think she would have been allowed to say it, because again, you can't say those things against the queen. If you have any negative feelings against the royal family, you have to keep them to yourself. But there were moments that I saw where I think she was very much showing how she felt about her situation. For example, when Queen Victoria in history married her off to Captain Davies when she was just 19 years old, she felt like she was being bartered off like property. She wrote a letter to her adoptive sister saying that she didn't want to get married, which I thought, wow, we're seeing her fight back and challenge, in a way, the authority of the queen. But of course, she still did it. But when she did marry Captain Davies, she signed her name in the marriage registry, not as Sarah Forbes Bonetta, but as her own name. And that's a historical fact.
Right.
So is that like a little bit of resistance from her? I like to think that it is. So maybe Sarah would be somebody who would feel, especially today, more comfortable with openly challenging the monarchy. On the other hand, she named her first daughter that she had with Captain Davies after the Queen.
Right.
So her first daughter was Victoria Davies. Now, is that because she felt like she had to? Like she felt like she owed the Queen for everything that she had? Or is that because she genuinely loves the Queen? I don't know. But I would like to think that with all the discussions that we're able to have today, she would feel more comfortable in speaking her truth. That's really all I would want her to be able to do. She's allowed to feel however she feels, but I think the real victory would be her being allowed to speak her truth.
I do wish we had some more insight into her own, first person narrative of her life, but alas, that is history. I loved the book. The rising action kind of had my heart like palpitating. And when the bottom kind of falls out at the end, I won't give anything away, but I was just left to reflect on, that is probably how this would have played out.
I do hope that people will read The Queen's Spade. Obviously, I hope that people will enjoy it. First and foremost, it's a book, and I tried to make it entertaining. The first time I've written a revenge thriller, so I hope that people like it. On the other hand, I also hope that people kind of use this as a gateway, if you've never learned about Sarah Forbes Bonetta, to learn a little bit about her history. Because again, we have to ask ourselves, why in the world would somebody who was the Queen's ward, an African princess who was talked about in history, newspapers, suddenly just disappear from the narrative of the British royal family? And so many of us don't know that she existed. And I think that speaks to how important was she really then? If this isn't a story that even the current British family may even know about her. So, I hope that people learn more about her history and more buried Black histories that have been erased, but are still important to know. And she's not the only one as well.
Right.
There have been recent discussions about the Ethiopian Prince Alamehu, who was taken in a similar way to Britain. I don't know what was with Queen Victoria and taking all these people from South Asia and Africa and stuff and taking them as wards. But oftentimes their stories kind of end sadly. And Prince Alamehu was very sad, depressed. He died in Britain, and the current British monarchy won't allow his bones to be repatriated back to Ethiopia. Wow. Yeah, even though Ethiopians asked for this. So this is kind of an ongoing history. I hope people learn more about it. And I hope people maybe use this book to think through certain things that are happening today. Maybe it's a gateway to understand, what do multicultural societies really mean? Like if your country says like, yeah, we're all for black and brown and everybody, is that really what's going on? Or is it papering over the actual racism that's happening in society? So hopefully people will get something out of the book. And I am writing a companion novel to this book. So
Oh, that's
I'm excited.
exciting.
Yes, we got to learn history and not forget it so that we don't repeat the mistakes of the past. So that's something that I'm really passionate about.
Definitely. Us as well here on Off With Their Headlines. Well, Sarah, thank you so much. The Queen's Spade is out now. Listeners can get it wherever books are sold. I highly recommend. It was, like you said, it was entertaining, but also kind of a thought exercise. So I'm really glad we could sit down to chat today.
Thank you. Yes. And if anyone's interested in any more of my work, especially my fantasy work, you can find it at www.sarahraughley.com.
Perfect. Well, thank you so much. And I can't wait to read that companion novel. That sounds exciting.
It's coming out next year.
Ooh, all right. Well, you heard it here first.
Well, that was wonderful, I'm assuming. What really struck you, particularly from your conversation with Sarah?
I think going into it, I'm a white woman. As I was reading The Queen's Spade, which again, go out and get this book. It is great for anyone interested in historical fiction, but also in a little bit of intersectionality. The revenge plot aside, this is a book that features a flawed heroine, a person who doesn't fit neatly into the mold that she's trying to be squished into. And instead of examining and making excuses for that, Sarah Raughley just embraces it and goes with it. So that was the thing that really struck me the most, was hearing first person why she decided to do that, as she talked about a way of processing her own attitudes and emotions towards colonialism, towards racism in the modern era through Sarah. I was really, really grateful that she spoke so candidly about it in our interview. She mentioned at one point that the monarchy needs to end in order for this issue to kind of fully be repaired. And that took me aback initially, but I was like, you know what? Yeah, because this is an institution that is built on the back of slavery. Like it just is at this point.
And that's one of the things that's kind of hard with the conversation, because how can you really modernize monarchy enough to make it somehow
Palatable, equitable. Yeah,
and
exactly.
And a meritocracy, because it's not
Right.
a meritocracy.
Right.
And how do you really make amends to this issue of racism if you can't even really admit it's happening?
Exactly. And you still hold on to everything you gained from this corrupt system. So I think that was my biggest takeaway, is like, yeah, that is a valuable, worthwhile perspective that I think we should be considering in our conversations. And also just getting to ask her, what do you feel about Harry and Meghan kind of taking the middle road when it comes to reconciling some of this, the unconscious bias of it all. I loved picking her brain, and getting those perspectives is so important as we continue to do this commentary.
Yeah, and I keep thinking about this kind of flawed heroine narrative, because the one thing I really loved about Sarah's book is that Sarah, the character in her book, the lead character, is not perfect, and she's not supposed to be. And in fact, I think that's supposed to be part of the commentary, is that she's presenting a quote unquote justifiably angry black woman.
Yeah.
And you can't hide from it. You need to stare straight at what's happening here. And I think that's really powerful. And I wish our conversations about real people, real royals, could be that complex, because even looking at Meghan's new brand, which, just to catch people up, if you missed it, Meghan dropped a new reel Monday, February 17th. It was around 8:00 p.m. Montecito time, which is Pacific time. Montecito time. You got me with that in the beginning.
Yeah,
Harry
sorry.
hands her the camera while she's in the garden. She asks if it's on, and then she just starts talking about, I'm so excited for my show to drop in 2 weeks, but also I have a brand dropping, and that brand is As Ever. And she ties it back to the TIG and getting back to the things that she loves to do that she hasn't been able to do for the last few years for many reasons.
So why does that make her a flawed heroine, Meredith? Because I assume that's where you're going with this segue.
I love how you're setting me up for this. Yeah, yell at Meredith online. What I mean is, she does. So the first question, of course, is, well, what about American Riviera Orchard, which we have known for some time, even before the Vanity Fair story came out, et cetera, that there were trademark issues with ARO. I said it right once. There's no way I'm going to say it right again. I feel like it's now a safe space to say that I hated that name.
I did not like
I
the
thought
name.
it was the clunkiest name. The fact that they didn't just keep yelling it out just to see how it rolled off the tongue, I do not understand. As Ever is a much better name.
Again, we're going to get into this conversation on a broad level, but just with the names, I have questions about the process, because she talks about As Ever being a name she thought of in 2022. I think I remember her saying.
Yes,
and then,
she does say 2022.
And then ARO, she's like, last year I had this thought about American Riviera. I'm like, wait. So apparently there's been some flip-flopping, which is not a critique of Meghan as a person. It's just like the name was clunky. The process seems to have been clunky. But now we are positioning this rebrand, this preemptive before launch rebrand, to As Ever as intentional and thoughtful and more aligned with her own values, which is a really great strategy.
And quite frankly, it might be. In some ways, it might be. And there's PR going on because everyone does PR.
There has to be. That's my thing.
Everyone does PR. This is not a knock against Meghan. And I feel like what we're dancing around is the fact that it's hard to even have this conversation without feeling like you need to put in a lot of this is not about negatively talking about Meghan. This is about thoughtfully analyzing and critiquing, not bashing, but critiquing a public figure's business moves.
Not her as a person. Just like when I talk about Will and Kate, it's not them as people. It's the decisions they make, what they mean for the institution. And with Meghan and Harry, it's the decisions they make, what they say about moving away from this institution, the British monarchy. So it is, like Meredith said, I think you can pick up on this conversation is also a little clunky because it's very hard to have these nuanced conversations, to think critically, not critique, not criticize, but critical thinking about Meghan. It just kind of is. She has these supporters which are doing wonderful work to deconstruct the actually hateful criticism of her in the media or on social media.
There is unfair, racist, double standards in reporting.
Full stop.
On Meghan, the Duchess of Sussex. Without question. That has not been eradicated. Hating Meghan Markle is a billion-dollar industry still. But there has to be some as well. Also, there needs to be room for candid and critical discussions about what they're doing now. And that's okay. That's okay. It's not negative.
It's not negative. It's just not overwhelmingly positive. And that's the same thing that comes up when you talk about Kate Middleton. You know, if I talk about something decision she's representing that isn't 100% positive, I get called a hater for that. You know, we can identify this on both sides of the Atlantic now at this point. There are these fierce defenders of Meghan, which I completely understand and applaud them for, you know, caring so much and defending her so well. But also, we are very intentional with our language in this episode.
Yeah.
That knee-jerk reaction to defend her against any and all, not just criticism, discussion. I got some comments about how I was over-analyzing just by mentioning, hey, there was an original name, there were trademark issues, now there's a new name. That should not be considered hateful. And the idea from, I think, stan culture is something that I would love to unpack at some point, just across the board. But the idea that you have to defend this person, they can do no wrong, I think is really harmful to these conversations and this type of commentary. It almost reinforces the idea of a quote-unquote perfect victim, that a person is so above criticism that they cannot be touched. In this case, it's kind of flipped on its head. You know, it's a way to overcome any of these actual hateful conversations, but it's, I think, weaponized in a really damaging way to just common sense and matter of fact conversation.
Nice plug. Just kidding. And to that point, I think that there is this fear that I see that if anyone talks about Meghan in any sort of way or her businesses that is critical or just kind of digging more, other people will pick up on it and will run with that as hate. Well, that shouldn't stop us from critically looking at things. In fact, that's dangerous if a certain group of people are going to run with anything that seems negative and spin it no matter what. Like that's going to happen. But that shouldn't be a call to not think critically and look at things underneath the surface and pull threads and all of that.
The knee-jerk reaction should not be, no, put up blinders, la la la, you can't say anything. Like, that's so harmful. And that is what reinforces on a side that you might not support overwhelmingly, being able to do the same thing and just ignore any accountability.
And to be clear, however you feel about Meghan, if you consider yourself a Sussex Squad member or however you feel, you are allowed to have whatever feelings that you want to have. This is just our very long way of explaining how we're going to try to have this conversation. So I think let's just table set here. We're going to talk about Meghan's announcement, some of the stuff we know, and we're going to talk about it on the assumption that everyone is on the same page as us now that we have explained why we're going to look at this and how we're going to look at it.
We approach these conversations with good faith. The British media cannot say the same. Those are bad faith analyses. This analysis, I think we are just looking to understand more fully what is going on in Montecito, what decisions are being made, why they are being made that way. Because when you're partnering with Netflix, okay, that is not just I want to be authentic to myself, so this is what I'm going to do move. There are critical decisions that need to be made. There is PR strategy. There is marketing strategy. That is just kind of the name of the game.
Yeah, it's all involved in this. And I will say Meghan is very good because she knows how to communicate these things and she knows how to connect with people, which is a skill.
Absolutely.
It is a skill. It sometimes besmirches influencer culture, but no, she actually knows how to do this. So the setup of her video, she's in the garden, Harry hands her the phone. She says, hey, you're going to hear a lot about this. I want you to hear it from me first. Again, reinforcing that you're going to hear it from me.
I love that she's being more open about the fact that there is this like opposition party to her at this point.
It's so refreshing.
It is.
She made a jam joke.
She made a jam joke. She's kind of just embracing it at this point. I think she's at a point personally where she's accepted, yeah, I'm going to get hate no matter what I do. I'm going to still live authentically and put myself out there, which is really courageous. And like, I do love that about her. She never fully just slinks away. Whenever she's kind of in hiding, quote unquote, it's, I think, to regroup and to restructure, which bravo.
And I think she has a really good strategy for how she's approaching this, which, yeah, she brings up, can you believe that, that jam coverage without really saying it, without giving specific examples, because we all know what happened with her jam last year. So she goes through, she gives a couple tidbits. First of all, as ever, is going to be in partnership with Netflix, which is a huge deal.
That is a
and
big
also
announcement.
flies in the face of this idea that Netflix and Harry and Meghan are on the outs because they wouldn't invest like this.
Doubling down, it sounds like.
Yes. And from what I've seen and heard, it's thought that I think Netflix is going to be manufacturing this this line or having some involvement with it and
merchandising it.
Because here's the thing. Netflix has been working on for quite some time to build up kind of a merch store as an extension of to make money off the stuff that they see, like
Bridgerton is a big one.
Exactly.
Big one.
So they want to get in on that too. And for Meghan, having a big partner like that is actually a great idea for some of these processes and patent lawyers and just all these kind of ins and outs that go into this. It does look like, based on the website, that there is going to be this Shopify standalone store as well. So the fact that Netflix is doing this in conjunction with her says they have a lot of faith that the show is going to do well, but either way, the merchandise is going to do so well. Because here's the thing, love her or hate her, Meghan makes money. Because here's the thing, Meghan is at Invictus Games, right? She wears Valencia Keys, which I believe is a woman-owned small business. It's a business. It's just a regular size business. She wore a piece of jewelry by them and they saw an 11,000% increase
in sales.
Yep. So the Meghan effect, just like the Kate effect, is a real thing. So whatever anyone thinks, this is going to be a success at some financial level.
Exactly. And those financial decisions do play a part here on both Netflix's end. This is going to be overwhelmingly successful for them. I'm sure they get a cut of profits. It also drives awareness. Hey, Netflix sells physical products, not just digital media. But for Meghan, celebrity brands, the overhead of actually producing from start to finish a whole line of products, astronomical, insane. If you can get yourself in for your first business venture with an established business partner, that is beneficial.
And that's like Skims. I mean, not the same, but Kim Kardashian isn't out there making Skims. They basically, she's
Kylie
kind of
Cosmetics, I remember back in the day.
They have some amount of royalty equity in the company, but they're not out there. She didn't make Skims herself.
Right.
You know?
Kylie Jenner was not going to a lab and formulating samples of product. That was a ColourPop facility just kind of like on the back end diverted into Kylie Cosmetics. So this is an age-old strategy for creating a product line. And I think it'll be really successful, obviously. Like, I don't even think that's a hot take.
It's gonna, yeah. I mean, we've seen it. It's going to be successful. And I actually think the name change, while I don't think this is why they did it, I think it feels less, something about an ARO felt a little elite and maybe kind of out of touch with right now. As Ever feels softer and whimsier and a little more cottagecore. And I think that's a better aesthetic, actually.
It's a way to remind us, too, that Meghan's always been here doing lifestyle. You know, she actually references the TIG, which TIG shout out. I loved, too, the new little logo. There's a new website for As Ever. Right now, it's just like a landing page, but they put the logo on there. It's 2 hummingbirds and a palm tree. So it's still a nod to Montecito. And the hummingbirds are something we've seen as a motif from the Sussexes a few times so far. Harry talks about them in Spare. They talk about a hummingbird coming into the kitchen or something, flying around, and he like gets it out. And one of his friends said, you know, maybe that's like a message or a symbol, because the Aztec considered hummingbirds reincarnated warriors, and the Spanish called them resurrection birds.
Oh, I love that.
So it's a symbol of rebirth. And then, of course, who could forget the Harry and Meghan Netflix documentary where Prince Archie and Harry are watching the hummingbirds on the balcony, but Archie is more preoccupied with his dirty foot and will not pay attention to the birds. I love it.
I get him.
There are a lot of little Easter eggs in this already that I think do speak more authentically to Meghan as a person rather than just her geographic location.
I think it was a good move, but I also think it's interesting how she framed ARO, because she does bring that up and say, as you said a bit earlier, that ARO was something that they'd come up with last year and had started to put together. But because it was so geographic, it really limited what she could do manufacturing
and who it would appeal to
and that As Ever has actually been in the works for a while, since 2022. So that is the public facing statement. My best guess, and from what I've talked to some people, is that it was a trademark issue. Like, that's what happened. It was a trademark issue with ARO, because the idea that Meghan's playing 3D chess is not really substantiated, because I don't think you could just like F around with trademarks like that.
Can't.
I don't think that's how it works. I think you have to show that you're actually trying to sell something. I actually think that's really bad long-term business strategy. I think, and I have said this before, that sometimes we have seen that they get very excited with their ideas and they come out with them, and they might jump the gun just a little bit before all the I's are dotted and the T's are crossed. And it seems like that happened with ARO, and it ran into a trademark issue. And we knew about that months ago.
Specifically, the trademark issue is that the U.S. Patent Office will not register a name if it includes a commonly used geographic location. So if there's likelihood that another brand will pop up with this name, it makes the trademark process very difficult. So we think that that's what happened here.
Also, if you're really playing through that this was some long-term strategy, none of it makes sense. It doesn't make sense to drop in March and then have nothing happen. It doesn't make sense for all the jams to go out with ARO on it. She does some very, very clever asides acknowledging the ridiculousness of the British media, but I don't think that her business strategy is based off of messing around with the British media, because what's the point? You're getting the wrong brand name out there. I just don't think that's what it is. I think there's a trademark issue, and they might have jumped the gun a little soon with announcing this brand.
What if it was a decoy all along?
I can't.
I've seen that as well. So yeah, and Meghan's video, which was delightful, you hear Harry at the beginning, you see one of their pups in the background. It was great. It was also most likely pre-filmed. Most likely she was following some bullet points, because she announces the Netflix partnership. She announces the name change. She talks about the stuff that's going to be in the brand. It's great for positioning. It's also great for, her and generating social media interest. And it's still personal. A good PR.
She does a great job.
A good PR statement strategy is both personal connects to the audience and hits those bullet points. And there's no reason that it can't be both. Calculated is like a dirty word when it comes to public figures, especially women, but that's what this is. It's calculated behind the scenes at what is going to land well, what is going to position yourself the best, but it can also be really meaningful for her and come from the heart at the same time.
And remember, calculating is okay when you're a man. It's strategizing. You're a step ahead of the game. Calculating when you're a woman is a negative thing. Right. So that's the other thing. Conniving, which it's not. She is really good. She's really good at digital marketing. She's very good at creating an audience, at cultivating. And we know this as people on the internet. You are showing yourself. You're also protecting yourself because that's important. But you find a way to connect with the audience. And it is genuine. It is this excitement because I think she loves doing this kind of stuff and probably just feels relieved that she can kind of get back into it.
I'm sure it feels good. And I just thought while you were saying that about, connecting with people, she does have her comments turned off still. And I was just thinking like, if she really wanted to play the game, play the 40 chess, she could have astroturfed. She could have bought followers. She could have had people flood the comment section to drown out all of the negativity we know she would have gotten. But she didn't do that. She just removed herself from that narrative. So that's something I just thought of. I'm excited. I'm going to buy as much as I can. And this also makes me feel good.
I was about to say, wait, do you think she is dropping this because she knows that you have a wedding coming up and so you can put things on your wedding registry?
I don't think it'll go with our theme. Our theme is very autumnal, rustic, like barn thing aesthetic.
Wait, for your registry or for your wedding?
For the wedding. Sorry.
Okay, I'm saying the registry. You need
You're saying products.
Some bespoke textiles. You need some incense,
some jam.
You're gonna need a pot holder or two.
Yeah, literally. But I was worried with the first launch of American Riviera Orchard. My knee-jerk reaction as a consumer was, oh God, my FOMO is going to be off the charts because this shit's going to sell out. With Netflix producing and merchandising and retailing, I don't think it'll sell out. Like, it'll probably go out of stock at some point, but it'll come back. Which makes me very happy.
I think this is going to keep things moving.
Yes.
In a way that's hard to do on your own, even if you are a powerful public figure.
Supply chain, man, it is rough for everybody.
It's rough out there. I
spent $9 on eggs today. Come on.
The way I am fighting for my life out here for affordable
Speaking
eggs.
Of which, I have to check in on my male Instacart shopper. Hang on.
God, what happened? Can he not find scallions again?
It was shallots. Thank you very much. Oh, no, we're good. That was the only substitution we had to make.
All right.
Thank you.
Thoughts and prayers. Well, I think this has been a good initial conversation on Meghan's business.
And we do want to hear your thoughts on this as well. Maybe we'll start a chat on the Patreon for this as well.
That's a great idea. A free level chat where everyone can just discuss it in a community where we're all kind of coming from a similar place.
On the same level.
We're not bots.
But we don't, encourage same thinking. It's not like you have to blend in or like.
No, and you don't have to agree with us at all.
Yeah, no, not at all.
You don't have to agree with us. Give us
your
point of view.
But when you are hatefully disagreeing is when we will block and delete.
That's when we're going to have an issue. But I don't suspect we'll have that issue with our Patreonians. And speaking of them, Molly White, I think, finally figured out that
she finally listened long enough in the episode.
Poor Molly. She was like, wait, I'm on this?
It's enthusiastic for now, Molly, because I saw your comment. You're so sweet. Thank you so much for your support.
Yeah, she's like, oh my gosh, I can't believe I'm like, Molly.
You have no idea.
We have turned you into a whole running narrative. You have no idea.
Somebody please join Molly on the Patreon press secretary level so that she's not alone in
because
these
we're starting to have some some infighting for placing stories about the other, I'm trying to leak on Amanda. She's trying to leak on me. So we really need to bring in, I don't want to say a Christian Jones. We won't give you character names.
We need to divide the household. So we do need another press secretary.
Yeah, we're going to need to divide the household. If anyone would like to join Molly White, that is the 25. Press secretary's thing.
Tier. Yeah, Patreon, it's a thing. Afternoon tea with me in April, it's also a thing. And you can find me and Meredith on our respective socials, which are all linked for you in the episode description, and video episodes on YouTube 1 week later.
It's been lovely chatting with you.
Always lovely to see you,
unpack
Meredith.
Your groceries or something.
Yeah, we'll see if it gets here. Bye.
All right, bye.
Today is rough. I don't know what it is.
Y'all, I don't know. Okay. Have the confidence of a 25-year-old breaking into the Social Security system.
Oh my God.
Have the confidence of someone of a billionaire who thinks that Social Security is being paid out to 150-year-olds and not a computer programming
Let's
thing.
do
Okay.
it.